Welcome back to American Government and Politics. This is Professor Jonathan Day. This is part 2 of Congress. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at the internal structure of Congress. So, in the internal structure of Congress, for the House, you have, these are the leadership positions. So you have the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and the Majority Whip. And then for the minority party, whichever party has the fewer number of members, there's a minority leader and a minority whip. The Senate, on the other hand, has the president of the Senate, and that's the vice president, the majority leader, the majority whip, and the president pro tempore. The president pro tempore is a junior senator that's chosen to preside over the daily functions of the Senate. So the vice president is supposed to do this, but it's kind of seen beneath the vice president to show up every day to the Senate. They have other more important things that they want to do, and so they choose a junior member of the Senate to serve as the president of the Senate for running the daily meetings or the daily operations. Then you have the minority leader and the minority whip. And the key positions about these minority leader, minority whips is these are the ones who, if the party takes control of the Senate or the House, they usually become either the Speaker of the House or the majority leader of their chamber. So what is the power of the Speaker of the House? And this is really interesting. The Speaker of the House is the most powerful position in Congress because in the House, they are able to determine who gets to be the chair of which committee, who gets to sit in who gets to go to which committees, where the bills go to which committees, when the bills come up to a vote, if they ever do, how much time they get voted on, and so forth. And so the Speaker of the House basically runs the entire show and has so much power that they are actually the most powerful member of Congress because of that. In the Senate, the majority leader has very similar powers to the Speaker of the House in terms of being able to determine who sits on committees, who's the chair of the committee, where bills go, when they come up to vote, if they ever come up to vote. And so the majority leader is very powerful in the Senate. But the reason they're not as powerful as the Speaker of the House is the majority leader can actually be, the bills in the Senate can be filibustered, and we'll talk about that. But the minority party can hold up bills from being voted on, whereas in the House, there's no such rule. And so the Speaker of the House can pass a lot of things without being stonewalled by the minority party. So let's talk about how Congress is structured below the leadership. So you have what's called standing committees, and standing committees are permanent congressional committees with responsibility for a particular area of public policy. And standing committees, for example, in the House, you have the Committee on Agriculture, Appropriations, Armed Services, and Budget, and you can see the whole list here. The most powerful committee actually is this Committee on Rules, because the Committee on Rules actually allows for determines whether or not there should be debate on a bill or whether or not there should be amendments allowed. And if you allow amendments on a bill, that could allow the minority party to drastically change the nature of a bill. And so this is why the Speaker of the House oftentimes stacks the Committee of the Rules with many of their own party relative to the minority party, because they want to make sure that they can determine what the rules on the bill's passage are. In the Senate, you have similar standing committees. They're named slightly different in some of them. You have Appropriations, Armed Services. You have Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. You have Finance. Rules Administration is not like the Rules Committee over in the House. They don't get to determine how bills get voted on. You have Judiciary, Veterans Affairs, and so forth. Okay, there are fewer standing committees in the Senate because there are fewer members in the Senate. There's 100 members in the Senate, 435 in the House. And so you have fewer standing committees, but you also have things like select committees. Sometimes these are temporary legislative committees established for a limited time period for a special purpose, such as a House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming or a Select Committee on Ethics. You also have subcommittees too. So these aren't in the slides, but you have subcommittees. These are where, for example, if you have a committee on international relations or so forth, then you could break that up into foreign relations. You could break that up into Middle East relations, European relations, Asian relations. And so you could have smaller groups of members of the Senate meet in these specific subcommittees. And what's key about this is that it also allows for you to have chairs of subcommittees. So it gives senators or House members ways to be a chair of a committee that's not the standing committee, but they're a chair of a subcommittee. So it gives them some power. It gives them some expertise in a particular area. It helps them to develop the skills to be a chair of a standing committee. And then also it allows for having subcommittees. It allows for specializations. So senators and House of Representatives can be really experts on their particular policy. Why do legislators join committees, or why do they form committees? Why do they join committees? And there are three reasons we're going to look at here. The first is that it provides members of Congress information about each policy area. And so instead of everyone having to learn about everything, you have people looking at specific aspects of the entire government policy. It gives members power within the institution itself. So it allows for members to have leadership roles beyond the top level leadership, to be a chair of a committee or chair of a subcommittee. And it also helps members to claim credit for passing bills to help them get reelected. So they can say, I was a chair of this, the agricultural committee. I'm doing good for the agricultural community. You should vote me into office again. Actually, we're going to look at a fourth reason. It helps members of Congress make good policy too. Because you can imagine a situation where if everyone had to know everything about everything, they wouldn't really be experts on anything, and so their knowledge would be very limited. But if you allow for committees to break up the government policy down into specific policy areas, then you allow for Congress people to be an expert on that particular area, and hopefully that makes better policy. Okay, so how are members chosen to be committee chairs? Well, one of the things is called the seniority system. So an informal rule is that the chair of a committee is the person who served on the longest serving member on that committee, and they're part of the majority part. They're the majority party. Okay, so the majority party is only going to allow for its party to be the chair of a committee because they want to run everything. And the longest serving member on a particular committee generally gets to be the chair of that committee. The top member of the minority party is called the ranking member. And so the Speaker of the House or the Majority Leader in the Senate, can choose anyone to be chair. So if they're really mad at a person, they could actually stop them from being chair and put someone else in. Okay, let's look about how a bill becomes a law. We're going to run through these steps pretty quickly. The first is that a member of Congress introduces the bill. It's very key that you remember that only a member of Congress can introduce a bill. If the president wants something to be in legislation, they have to get a member of Congress to introduce it into Congress. Second, the Speaker of the House in the House or the Majority Leader in the Senate, they can direct a bill to a particular committee and then a subcommittee. Then the committee might send it to a subcommittee. Then once the committee votes with a majority vote to release the bill to the floor, the entire floor of that chamber votes on the bill. Okay, so if a committee approves it with a majority vote, it goes to the entire chamber, and everybody within that chamber, whether it's the House or the Senate, gets to vote on the bill. If a majority votes on that bill, it then gets sent to the committee of the other chamber. And so if it started in the House, it moves over to the Senate now. The Senate then will send it to a committee and maybe to a subcommittee. Then when the full committee approves of it, it goes to the floor for a full vote from that chamber. And then if a majority approve of that vote, then it could go to the president if the second chamber didn't make any changes. But if the second chamber makes a change, you have to go to a conference committee. And that works out the difference between the House and the Senate, because both House and the Senate have to agree on the same version of the bill before it can be sent to the president. And then if they make the changes, it goes back to a vote for the House and the Senate. Then the House and the Senate will, if they get a majority vote there, then the final approval goes to the president, and the president either signs or vetoes the final version. Okay, and the president actually has three options here. The president could sign the bill, and if they sign the bill, it immediately becomes law. If they sit on the bill and 10 days go by and Congress remains in session, it becomes law. If 10 days go by and Congress went out of session, the bill is vetoed and has to start over again. Or the president could put a veto on the bill. And what the veto means is that both chambers have to then attempt to override the veto. And so they vote to see if they're going to override the president's veto. And if you get 2/3 to support, to vote for the bill in the Senate and the House, then it becomes law, even though the president has vetoed it. If they don't get the 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate, then it has to start over from square one and start again. Now, bills rarely get overturned if they've been vetoed. But an example of a bill that would get overturned, that has been overturned if it was when it was vetoed, is when Congress likes to put a bunch of pork barrel projects, meaning they like to bring money back to their constituents to build a road or a bridge or whatever, and they do this to try to garner popularity from their constituents. When every congressperson is trying to get a pork barrel project in the same bill, then if the president vetoes it because there's just a lot of spending that they just don't want, Congress will override that veto because they all want to bring that money back home to their district. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of differences between the House and the Senate, just so that you can kind of see an overview of the difference of the internal structure. The House has the 435 representatives, but the Senate has 100 senators. Each member of the House is elected every 2 years, but for the Senate, each member is elected every 6 years. The constituency for a House is a congressional district, but for the Senate, each senator has to represent the entire state. In the Constitution, the qualifications are 25 years old for a House member, 30 years old for a Senate. 7 years, you have to be a citizen for at least 7 years to be a House member. 9 years if you're a senator. Notice they valued the senator over the representative given the higher qualifications. Unique rules for the House. They get to be first on revenue bills like taxes, and they're the first ones to impeach officials, meaning they think there's enough evidence to remove an official from office. Whereas in the Senate, they give advice and consent on treaties and judicial nominees. And so they're the only ones that have to be consulted in terms of a judicial nominee by the president or for treaties. And they're the sole ones that do the trying of officials. And you have to get 2/3 of the vote in the Senate in order to remove official from office. The leadership is the Speaker of the House for the House. For the Senate, it's technically the Vice President. And there is no filibuster in the House. In the Senate, there is. And so what is a filibuster? Well, a filibuster in the Senate is a tactic used by senators to block a bill by continuing to hold the floor and speak under the Senate rule of unlimited debate until the bill's supporters back down. Essentially, it's a way to keep a bill from going to vote. In order to end a filibuster, you need to have a cloture vote, which is a procedure through which the Senate can limit the amount of time spent debating a bill. And you need 60 senators to agree to end a filibuster. This is why a lot of times the news media will wrongly say that it needs 60 votes to pass a bill. That's not true. You only need 50 votes to pass a bill in the Senate, but you need 60 people to agree to end the filibuster if there's a filibuster taking place. So 60 people need to be okay with the bill going to a vote, essentially. But technically, only 50 senators need to vote for the bill. So you'll get some senators who vote to end cloture because they want the bill to pass, but ultimately they won't vote for the bill because they don't want to be blamed by their constituents for it. In the House, you have what's called a closed rule or an open rule. You don't have this in the Senate. House can have, on the Rules Committee, they can decide to close the rules, which means no amendments are allowed to a bill, and there's a time limit for there's no debate or conditions on a debate. Open rules means that in the House you can debate upon the bill and you can add relevant amendments. And open rules are not used very often because the minority party can drastically change a bill and for their benefit. Okay, and the majority party usually likes to have an iron fist on what gets voted on. Okay, that's the difference between the House and the Senate. That's the end of part 2 of the lecture on Congress. Thank you so much.